My name is Avery Lawson, and if you've ever watched your entire self-worth get laughed out of a ballroom, then you'll understand why I almost walked away from everything that night. It was the annual Winter Gala at Orion Dynamics, my husband's company, a glittering event filled with investors, partners, and executives. I wore the green satin dress he once told me was his favorite. My hair was pinned up just right, my heels clicked confidently across the marble floor, and I was determined to support him on the biggest night of his career. Then I saw the place card. Nestled among crystal glasses and gold-rimmed plates was my name, or rather what someone thought was funny to call me. Gold digger, nobody. A soft gasp escaped my lips. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a cruel coincidence, a printing error. But then I heard the giggles. The stifled laughs turned into open snickers. One woman whispered, "Well, she clings to him like she bought stock in his success." And then I looked at my husband, Mark. He didn't say a word, didn't blink. He just sat there sipping his water, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. That silence, it was louder than any insult. I stood there, heat flushing my face, feeling like the entire ballroom was collapsing in on me. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Not there. I picked up the card, slowly folded it neatly, and placed it in my clutch. Then I turned to the CEO, a tall woman with a wine glass in one hand and a smirk on her lips. I leaned in, and in the calmest voice I could muster, I whispered, "If I were you, I'd check your stock prices tomorrow morning." She blinked. And I walked out. That one sentence changed the entire game. You see, I'm not just Mark's wife. I'm a forensic equity analyst, a silent shark in a sea of polished suits. I've spent the last decade uncovering financial corruption while being labeled supportive spouse. But that card, that was the final straw. The insult wasn't new. The silence that followed it, that was the betrayal. And betrayal for someone like me is a trigger, not a defeat. If you've ever stood in a room full of people who laughed while you shattered inside, hit the like button and stay with me. This story, it's not just about revenge, it's about reclamation. Because from that moment on, I stopped being the accessory they could ignore, and started being the storm they didn't see coming. Let's begin. I wasn't always this composed. There was a time I would have rushed to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and tried to muffle my sobs with a cocktail napkin. But that night, something in me broke, and something far older, far sharper came roaring back. As I sat alone in the back seat of a taxi, green satin bunched in my lap, mascara drying on my cheek, I could hear my own voice echoing from years before. "Mark, let's make a deal. We build each other up. No ego, no hierarchy. Just two partners pulling the same weight no matter how far we go." We made that promise 10 years ago in our shared apartment. We were both barely surviving on boxed mac and cheese and hand-me-down furniture. He was the tech whiz with big dreams. I was the quiet one, always scanning numbers and finding patterns others missed. I still remember the first time I uncovered a fraudulent filing in a mid-sized logistics company. It took 3 weeks, 2 full pots of coffee per day, and a mountain of quarterly reports. But I did it. The fallout from that report saved one of my clients, an educational endowment fund, from investing $3.2 million into what would have been a financial sinkhole. That wasn't playing around. That was precision. That was accountability. That was me doing what I was built to do. But when Mark got his first executive role, things started to shift. At first it was subtle. He'd interrupt me at dinner parties when people asked what I did. "Oh, she consults," he'd say quickly. "She does some neat stuff from home, helps a few clients here and there." Then it became normal. He'd show up at events alone, saying I was busy with some spreadsheet thing. He stopped asking my opinion on investment strategies, even though half his portfolio was built off my early advice. The man who once printed out my first published financial column and pinned it to the fridge now introduced me as his better half, who keeps the house running. I didn't notice it at first because I loved him. I wanted to be supportive. I thought we were just going through a phase of imbalance like all couples do. But then came the whispers. His colleagues. His new boss, Vanessa. Her smile too polished, her compliments too pointed. "She's got the luxury of time, huh?" Vanessa had once said, clinking glasses with me at a cocktail party. "Must be nice not having to chase deadlines like us." Luxury time. I was working 12-hour days in silence, analyzing earnings reports, tracking executive compensation schemes, and issuing confidential reports to clients who trusted me to keep their money safe. The only difference, I didn't put it on LinkedIn. I didn't shout it at board meetings. I let my work speak for itself. But they never heard it. Because Mark stopped listening. And that night at the gala when he watched me get publicly humiliated and said nothing, That's when I realized he hadn't just stopped listening. He'd stopped seeing me. The woman they all laughed at wasn't invisible. She was underestimated. And people who underestimate me, they tend to regret it. If you've ever watched someone you loved forget what made you powerful in the first place, tell me about it in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who's been quiet for too long. Because that was the moment I decided I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. The next morning I opened my laptop not to drown in spreadsheets, but to sharpen my weapon. Because if they thought the gold digger nobody was done, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Mark and I weren't always strangers passing each other in the same house. There was a time when he looked at me like I was the answer to a question he hadn't even known he was asking. We met at the University of Michigan final semester. It was raining, the library was packed, and I was buried in a corporate finance textbook highlighter in hand. He sat across from me, tapping his pen to some obnoxious rhythm. I glanced up and said, "If you're planning to start a band, maybe try the music department." He laughed, the kind of laugh that makes you look twice. "Sorry," he said. "I think better with background noise. I'm Mark." I didn't know it then, but that conversation would stretch across 10 years. 2 cities, 1 wedding, and eventually a quiet unraveling. We bonded over our shared ambitions. Mark wanted to build something revolutionary in tech. I was drawn to the invisible stories behind balance sheets, the patterns that betrayed deception, the trails that led to financial wrongdoing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and I was good at it. After graduation, we moved into a 500-square-foot studio in Detroit. He worked at a tiny startup making just enough to pay off student loans. I launched my consulting business from our dining table, reviewing earnings reports late into the night, my fingers stained with highlighter ink and black coffee. He believed in me back then. "I married the smartest woman I've ever met," he'd say, whenever friends asked how we managed the chaos of 2 careers. "She finds fraud for fun." And I did. Over time, my clients grew. So did my reputation. I wasn't just helping investors, I was preventing disasters. I caught discrepancies in executive compensation that saved retirement funds. I exposed misreported R&D expenses that led to internal audits. And slowly, I built a name for myself in small but powerful circles. But as Mark's career began to take off, something subtle shifted. It started with how he talked about work. Suddenly, everything was we and they, his team, his board, his innovation strategy. He stopped asking what I thought about the market. If I offered insights, he'd nod politely, then pivot the conversation. "The scale is different," he said once. "You deal with small portfolios. I'm looking at global growth." I smiled, but something inside me twisted. He started traveling more, hosting dinners I wasn't invited to. I made excuses at first. "He's just busy. This is a crucial time." But when I saw photos online, him next to his team arm around Vanessa, the word family used in captions, I realized what was happening. He wasn't just moving up. He was moving away. The final confirmation came 5 months before the gala. He was offered a new role, Vice President of Strategy. It came with a massive raise, international exposure, and endless late nights. He brought me the offer letter like a prize. "We made it," he said. "Everything we've worked for." "What about me?" I asked. "My clients, my business." "You can pause for a bit. Once we settle in, you'll have more time for passion projects." Passion projects. That's what he called the work that kept food on our table in those early years. That's when I understood Mark didn't break our partnership in one blow. He let it erode slowly each time he talked over me, each time he left me out, each time he chose someone else's validation over my voice. He stopped seeing me as a partner. And I kept pretending it didn't hurt. But pretending doesn't make pain go away. It just lets it build layer by layer until one day you snap. If you've ever given someone your full support, only to watch them forget how you carried them through the hard parts, leave a comment. Someone needs to know they're not alone. Because in that moment, I wasn't just hurt. I was awake. And that was the most dangerous thing that could have happened for them. The first time I heard her name, it was just a casual mention. "Vanessa thinks we could streamline the entire onboarding process," Mark said one night over dinner, scrolling through emails. "She's got this way of cutting through the noise really sharp." I didn't flinch. I'd heard him praise colleagues before. It didn't mean anything until it kept happening. Vanessa suggested this shift in product messaging that completely changed how the board sees our value proposition. Vanessa's leading the Q2 strategy. She's brilliant. Vanessa really challenges how I think. And then one afternoon, Mark came home with an announcement. "She's going to be my direct supervisor," he said, setting his briefcase down like he was delivering holy scripture. "I'll be reporting to her starting Monday." I raised an eyebrow. The same Vanessa who's redefining your entire perspective? He laughed. Don't start, she's a visionary. I'm lucky to learn from someone like her. I wanted to believe that was all it was, professional admiration. But admiration doesn't explain the shift that followed. He became sharper with me, dismissive like my expertise had become a cute quirk. He started repeating Vanessa's opinions like scripture, even in conversations that had nothing to do with work. When I expressed concern about the rising debt-to-equity ratios in tech sectors, he didn't even look up from his phone. Vanessa says those ratios are irrelevant in this cycle, he replied. You're focusing on traditional metrics when the market's driven by innovation now. I stared at him. Mark, I've been analyzing corporate balance sheets for a decade. This isn't just theory. She has an MBA from Wharton, he said flatly. She knows what she's talking about. And just like that, years of experience were dismissed with a shrug. But it wasn't just about numbers anymore. Vanessa had found a way to creep into every corner of our life. When we debated remodeling the kitchen, he said Vanessa thinks quartz countertops are more modern than granite. When I brought up taking a vacation, he said Vanessa says Europe's overrated. He spoke of her like she was the compass of truth, and I was just there. A background hum. Still, I tried. I suggested we have her over for dinner. If she means that much to your work, I'd like to meet her. She's very busy, he said quickly. She doesn't really do social gatherings outside the office. I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen the photos. Her, with the leadership team at happy hours at charity runs. Always in the middle, always glowing. And then came the first text. A polite message from Vanessa sent on a Sunday morning. Hope you're keeping busy with your passion projects while Mark drives some exciting developments here. So grateful to have such a dedicated team member. It looked innocent enough, but I knew what it meant. She wasn't just diminishing me professionally. She was redefining me in Mark's eyes. As someone small, unimportant, peripheral. The texts kept coming. Holidays, weekends, corporate wins. All threaded with phrases like so supportive, so flexible, so helpful. She never said I was intelligent, or respected, or valuable. She called me understanding. And every time Mark would glance at the message and say, Vanessa's so thoughtful. Thoughtful. This was strategy. She was positioning herself as the architect of his life professionally and personally. And Mark, he was swallowing it whole. If you've ever watched someone let another person slowly rewrite the truth of who you are, comment below. Because this is where the erosion begins. Not with a blowout, but with silence, with nods, with the slow death of being seen. Vanessa wasn't just building her empire at work. She was conducting a hostile takeover of my marriage. And I was the last person standing in her way. It started as a pattern so subtle most people would have missed it. But I'd made a career out of recognizing quiet manipulation. And Vanessa Jameson was not sloppy. She was deliberate. At first, it was the event invites. Company mixers, happy hours, weekend brunches with the leadership team. Mark would mention them vaguely. It's mostly just work stuff, nothing important, and then come home raving about how brilliant Vanessa's speeches were or how tight the executive team was becoming. When I asked why I wasn't included, he'd shrug. It's not a spouse thing, just internal bonding. But then I saw a post from the company's Instagram. A group shot at one of the event's executives plus their spouses. All smiling, all welcome. Except me. I stared at that photo for a full minute. Michelle from finance had her arm looped through her husband's. Sarah Chin, the CEO's wife, was passing out homemade cookies. Vanessa stood at the center like a queen. Mark was at her side. My seat had never even been set. When I showed him, he waved it off. That was just something casual. You wouldn't have had fun anyway. He never realized how that line shattered me. You wouldn't have had fun anyway. As if I didn't belong in the same room. As if my world, my mind, my work, my presence wasn't worth pulling up a chair. Then came the excuses, the justifications. Vanessa said the spouses who get too involved can sometimes make things awkward. She thinks it's better if we keep work and home separate. Michelle and Sarah, they're more social. The message was clear. Vanessa had decided I didn't fit the image she was building around her leadership circle, and Mark didn't push back. He let it happen. No worse, he participated. He started parroting her ideas as if they were gospel. Vanessa says branding is 70% perception. Vanessa says wives who focus on their own work too much often miss what's happening at home. And I knew what that meant. Vanessa didn't just want my husband's time. She wanted his loyalty, his admiration, his dependence, and I, his actual wife, was collateral damage in her climb. If you've ever felt yourself fading in someone else's life while they got dazzled by another's spotlight, tell me your story in the comments, because I see you. and I want you to know you're not crazy, you're not invisible, and you're not alone. One Thursday, Mark came home raving about a brilliant escape room team challenge Vanessa had orchestrated. You should have seen her. She solved the final puzzle in under a minute. I smiled politely, but inside something twisted. Because 2 days before that, I'd mentioned I was free that weekend, hoping we could spend time together. He'd said he was working late. He hadn't even told me about the event. And then the kicker came 2 weeks later. Vanessa sent a care package to our house, homemade muffins, a note, and a branded coffee mug from a recent leadership retreat. So sorry you couldn't join us, Avery. Mark was instrumental in our strategic breakout. You must be so proud. I held the mug in my hand like it was poison. She was making it clear again and again I didn't belong. She owned that world now, and Mark had made no effort to pull me back in. But what Vanessa didn't realize is that I had my own world. My own tools. My own methods of identifying patterns, tracing manipulation, and when needed, exposing those who think they're untouchable. And I was done waiting quietly on the sidelines. If you're still watching, and you've ever been told you're just a wife, just a supporter, or just someone who stays out of the way, hit that subscribe button. Let's build a space where none of us ever have to shrink to make others comfortable again. Because I'd made my decision. The next time Vanessa tried to put me in a box, she was going to find it had teeth. When the invitation to the annual Orion Dynamics Winter Gala arrived, it was nestled in an ivory envelope with gilded lettering, custom embossed, sealed with wax, pretentiously perfect. Mark left it on the kitchen counter with a casual "Vanessa insisted you come this year." I stared at the envelope like it might bite. After months of strategic exclusion, suddenly I was welcome. She said it's time you experienced the full culture, Mark added, pouring himself a glass of wine, like we were discussing dinner reservations, not corporate manipulation. My instincts flared immediately. Vanessa never did anything without a motive. Her insistence wasn't an invitation, it was a setup, a trap disguised as an olive branch. Still I nodded. Of course, I'll be there. 'Cause this time I wouldn't show up unarmed. I spent the week preparing, but not just with dresses and heels. I reviewed Orion's latest earnings call, checked SEC filings, cross-referenced stock movement against press release timelines, and downloaded every public-facing report with Vanessa's signature on it. I wasn't going to the gala as someone's wife. I was going as a threat. On the night of the event, I wore the same green satin dress from our anniversary 2 years earlier. Mark had complimented me endlessly that night. Tonight he didn't say much, just looked me over, cleared his throat, and said Vanessa said she's looking forward to seeing you in something elegant. Elegant. That word tasted bitter. The Creswell Grand Hotel shimmered like a dream. Chandeliers, velvet drapes, champagne flutes, every detail tailored to scream prestige. And yet when I walked in, I felt none of the intimidation I expected, because I knew who I was. Vanessa spotted us the second we entered. She swept over like a monarch, all silver gown and weaponized charm. "Avery," she said, voice raised just enough to draw attention. "You actually came." I smiled tightly. "Thank you for encouraging me." "Well, Mark deserves to have his +1 on such a special evening," she said smoothly, her hand brushing his arm. "Let me show you to your table." We followed her past rounds of seated executives. My heels clicked steadily, rhythmically, like a countdown. She stopped at a round table near the center. "Mark, you're up front with the executive team. Avery, you're seated here." My stomach dropped. "We're not sitting together," I asked, keeping my tone even. "Oh," she said with a practiced frown. "Didn't Mark explain executive seating is separate? Standard protocol." I looked to him. He didn't blink, just adjusted his tie and murmured, "It's just for the dinner." I turned back to the table, scanning place cards. That's when I saw it. Nestled between Sarah Chin and David Kim was mine, or rather what should have been mine. Instead, the card read, "Gold digger, nobody." Elegant calligraphy, cream cardstock, high-quality ink. They hadn't even tried to hide it. The laughter started in ripples. A few gasps, then chuckles, then like wildfire amusement lit the table. Someone whispered, "Did you see what they wrote?" Another voice said, still clinging to him after all this time. I didn't move. Not when the camera phones came out. Not when the waitstaff glanced nervously. Not even when Vanessa placed her hand delicately on my shoulder and said, "So sorry about the mix-up. I'm sure it's just a little printing error." I looked at Mark one last time. He was staring into his glass like it held the courage he'd misplaced years ago. He said nothing. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. It was theater, and he was part of the cast. If you've ever walked into a room expecting love and found betrayal dressed in tuxedos, share your story in the comments. Let's not keep these moments in silence anymore. I took a breath, collected my clutch, and walked past them all. As I neared the exit, I passed the CEO Vanessa's boss, a woman known for her ruthless smile and love of a scandal. I paused, leaned in, and whispered, "If I were you, I'd check your stock prices tomorrow morning." She blinked. I left, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to people who laugh at you is let them, right before you make them wish they hadn't. I didn't cry in the taxi. I sat in the back seat, hands folded tightly over my clutch green satin, pooled at my knees, my reflection flickering faintly in the window as the city lights blurred past. My heart didn't race. My breathing stayed steady. I'd already cried enough, just not for this moment. The driver didn't speak, though he glanced up a few times through the mirror. I'm sure he was wondering why a woman in a designer dress with tear-streaked makeup and steel in her spine was riding silently through the night like she was going to war. Because I was... When I stepped into the house, the silence hit like a memory. The kind that hurts more than any insult. Mark wasn't home. He was probably still there, maybe laughing with Vanessa and the others about the joke card. Maybe pretending he hadn't known it would happen, but he had known. I walked into our office, his office now, really. I hadn't used the space in months. It felt like a museum of what I used to be. My dual monitors sat dark. My filing cabinet hadn't been touched, but I still had my tools. And now I had a reason to use them again. I flicked on the screen. It hummed to life like an old friend. The moment I typed in my first password, something snapped back into place. The woman who'd once traced million-dollar frauds through layers of filings, obscure disclosures, and carefully shuffled expenses, she was back. And she was angry. I pulled up Orion Dynamics' latest 10K filing. It was public. Every number, every footnote. I'd kept my subscriptions live, Bloomberg Terminal, SEC database scrapers, independent whistleblower forums. I told myself it was just in case. Now I realized it had been instinct, survival, preparation. The first discrepancy came within 45 minutes. Executive stock options granted days before major press announcements that had sent Orion stock soaring. Not illegal, but unethical. A pattern, one that could be proven. I dug deeper. Revenue recognition that didn't align with cash flow realities. Research and development expenses that appeared and disappeared like magic tricks. And right at the heart of it, signatures. Vanessa's. She had been sloppier than I expected. Maybe she thought no one would ever look. Maybe she'd surrounded herself with enough yes-men to believe she was untouchable. Or maybe she never imagined that the woman she tried to erase would have the tools and the will to erase her instead. By sunrise, I had a working document 28 pages long, detailing inconsistencies, timing patterns, and manipulative accounting tactics. I wasn't done, not even close, but I had enough to cause concern if the right people saw it. Still, I didn't want to go to regulators, not yet. That would take months. Investigations drag. Reports are buried. I wanted speed. I wanted light. I wanted her to feel the shift in the air when her empire began to crack. So I opened a blank forum post on one of the most active investor boards under a pseudonym I'd never used publicly, Equity Watchdog 47. The title, Red Flags at Orion Dynamics, a deep dive into troubling financial practices. I wrote carefully, clearly. No accusations, just facts, data comparisons to industry norms. Everything sourced, everything footnoted, everything ready to burn. I posted it at 6:12 a.m. By 10:00 a.m., it had been shared over 700 times. By noon, 2 financial blogs had picked it up. By sunset, my inbox, an anonymous one created specifically for the alias, had received its first message. No subject line, no name, just a file attached and a sentence. "You're not wrong, there's more. Be careful." The file was a screenshot. Vanessa laughing, holding a wine glass. Behind her, a Slack thread. "Mark, she needs to know her place. It's done." Vanessa savage, but effective. And just like that, the last piece snapped into place. They hadn't just watched it happen. They orchestrated it. If you've ever been humiliated by someone who thought you wouldn't fight back, drop your story in the comments. Or just leave a single word watching. Because I was. And now it's their turn to watch what happens next. Because this wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And I was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. Not from rage, not even from adrenaline, but from clarity. For the first time in years, I could see the entire board, the players, the strategies, and every weak spot they thought they'd hidden. I made myself a strong pot of coffee and rolled up the sleeves of Mark's old university hoodie. The irony made me smile. He used to say that sweatshirt brought him luck, especially during finals. I guess it was my turn now. I opened the document again. This time I wasn't looking for hints. I was looking for the kill chain. The question I had to answer was simple. What was Vanessa Jameson so confident no one would find? The first clue lay in her timing. Over the past 18 months, Orion Dynamics had posted 3 consecutive quarters of record-breaking growth. Their stock price had surged nearly 40%, and multiple publications had praised their financial efficiency. But the data was too clean. Public filings showed sudden drops in R&D expenditures just before new product announcements. Deferred revenue spiked mysteriously right before earnings calls. Expense ratios dipped and rebounded with surgical precision. It was textbook manipulation designed not to steal money but to shape perception, to juice the stock, please investors, and most critically to inflate executive bonuses. That's where I found it. Buried deep in the footnotes of the executive compensation schedule was a clause bonus packages tied not to real profit margins, but to market performance relative to sector peers. If the stock climbed, they got paid. Whether the company actually earned those returns, that was secondary. And those stock options I'd found earlier, they had been granted just days before earnings calls. Calls bolstered by manipulated accounting tactics. But what made it lethal wasn't the numbers. It was the fingerprints. Vanessa's digital signature appeared on every quarterly earnings memo, every filing that quietly moved expenses from one bucket to another. And thanks to public employment records, I knew exactly when she joined the company right before the pattern started. She hadn't walked into a broken system. She built it. And Mark, his initials appeared on 2 memos, ones authorizing internal budget adjustments, signed off by Vanessa. That meant either he was complicit, or she'd used his access to cover her tracks. Either way, he wasn't clean. By the 3rd night, I had more than enough for a regulatory complaint. But I wasn't interested in months of bureaucracy. I wanted impact. So I prepared a second post under Equity Watchdog 47. Culture and conduct, when leadership failure goes beyond the numbers. This time I included whistleblower emails, Slack threads, internal memos, even excerpts from Vanessa's own digital communication with board members, where she encouraged narrative management over reactive transparency. The post went live Friday morning at 7:00 a.m. By lunch, it was trending on 3 investor platforms. By dinner, journalists were calling Orion's press office. By 9:00 p.m., I received an encrypted message from a burner account with a subject line that simply read, "Thank you." Attached was a PDF filled with internal emails, this time from accounting staff. They detailed a culture of fear, with Vanessa pushing for creative accounting and retaliation for employees who questioned the ethics. The most chilling line came from an assistant controller. "We're told not to rock the boat because the ship is already sailing toward an IPO valuation. But it's taking on water and I'm terrified we're going to drown with it." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about people being silenced, manipulated, and erased, just like me. If you've ever uncovered a truth so big it scared you, but you chose to share it anyway, leave a comment, or write "I see you." Because someone out there needs the courage to speak up, and your voice might be the spark they're waiting for. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about truth. And now the whole world was starting to see it. Saturday morning hit like a drumbeat. Notifications pinged nonstop, anonymous emails, whistleblower tips, screenshots of internal messages. I sat at my desk, still in the same hoodie now crusted with cold coffee stains, and stared at the sheer flood of responses. The story had caught fire. Financial journalists were dissecting the posts. Investment forums were ablaze with speculation. Orion Dynamics' Reddit thread, usually sleepy and filled with stock memes, was now hosting in-depth breakdowns of revenue inconsistencies and stock option timing. One message stood out. No subject line, no name, just a 2-line message. "She's been lying for months, and everyone knows it. We just needed someone brave enough to speak first. Thank you." Attached to that email was a digital folder labeled TJ Discrepancies. Inside were internal meeting notes, time-stamped audio logs, and damningly, an email from Vanessa herself. "Let's shift development costs to Q3. If we tie it to the beta announcement, we can push the stock ahead of option vesting. No one on the board questions good news." She'd written that, in her own words. My breath caught. This wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. And if that wasn't enough, there was more. A forwarded Slack message from the night of the gala, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. "Vanessa, did you all see Avery's face when she saw the card? Priceless. Total compliance achieved. She'll never dare question us again. Mark, she needed a reminder of where she stands. Vanessa, mission accomplished. Savage." I froze. I stared at Mark's name, my Mark. The man I had built a life with, the man I had sacrificed clients for. The man who used to bring me midnight coffee when I was crunching numbers at our kitchen table. He hadn't just stood by in silence. He'd approved of it, laughed about it, mocked me behind my back. The betrayal hit deeper than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because for a small, stupid part of me, I'd still been hoping I was wrong. But now I had it in writing. I forwarded the message to my encrypted archive, took a breath, and prepared the next strike. This time, I didn't need to explain the accounting. The numbers were already out there. What I needed to show now was the culture, the rot, the deliberate degradation of integrity from the top down. Post-title Toxic Leadership at Orion Dynamics, Why Numbers Alone Don't Tell the Full Story. The piece read more like a case study than an exposé. I didn't name names outright, but I didn't need to. I quoted whistleblower messages. I referenced Vanessa's communication style, the coercive tactics she used to silence dissent, and the way spouses, particularly women, were quietly erased from the executive culture unless they fit the image. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single person who'd ever been told they didn't belong in a room they built with their own sweat and skill. By Sunday night, Orion's stock had dropped 12%. Regulators issued preliminary inquiries. 2 major institutional investors pulled out. A tweet from a known financial activist read, "Shout out to whoever Equity Watchdog 47 is. This is what real oversight looks like. We've needed a voice like this in tech finance for years." I sat back in my chair, eyes burning, not from exhaustion, but from vindication. And then my inbox dinged again. It was from someone named Daniel K. No title, no details, just one line. "I work in legal. She's panicking. Keep going." If you've ever wondered whether exposing the truth is worth the fallout, I'm telling you now, it is. And if you've ever had to fight alone, type, "still standing" in the comments, because so am I. I didn't stop to celebrate, because now the truth had momentum. And that's the thing about truth. Once it starts rolling downhill, no one, not even someone like Vanessa Jameson, can stop it. By Monday morning, the tremors had turned into full-blown aftershocks. Orion Dynamics issued a vague public statement just after the markets opened. "We are aware of recent discussions regarding company practices and are conducting an internal review." Translation panic had begun. I sat on the edge of my couch, still in sweatpants, watching the news ticker roll across my screen. Orion Dynamics shares plummet amid whistleblower allegations. A knock at the door startled me. No, it wasn't the FBI or a reporter. It was my neighbor dropping off a package, but it made me realize how much this thing had grown. What started as my quiet rage in a back seat was now a public reckoning. I had always known how powerful numbers were, but I hadn't realized how powerful my voice could be when I stopped hiding it. Then at 2:17 p.m. I got the message I'd been waiting for. A secure email from a Wall Street Journal reporter. Subject: inquiry about Equity Watchdog 47. He'd connected the dots. He didn't know who I was yet, but he had verified most of my documentation independently and was planning a front-page exposé. He asked if I had additional materials to solidify the story. I stared at the screen. Did I want this? To be the person behind the curtain, the whistleblower who had taken down one of the tech darlings of the decade. Yes, I did. But I didn't just want the story to be about fraud. I wanted it to be about power, about women being erased, about silencing brilliance with smirks and place cards. So I wrote back with attachments, clean, clear, untraceable to my real name, enough for them to run the piece without ever revealing who Equity Watchdog 47 really was. The headline dropped Tuesday morning. Orion under federal investigation for accounting irregularities. Culture of control alleged at the top. Vanessa's name was in the first paragraph. So was her signature on the manipulated filings. So were the Slack messages. So was Mark's. My phone buzzed with another secure message at 11:43 a.m. Tyler Jameson placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I stared at the screen for a long time, then opened a new document. Subject: to my former husband. I didn't send it, not yet, but I started writing, because the time for silence was over. And then, just after noon, I heard the front door open. Mark. He stood in the hallway like a man carrying a building on his back. His usually crisp suit was wrinkled, his tie half loosened, and the look in his eyes wasn't confusion, it was defeat. "Avery," he said, voice cracked like he hadn't used it in days. "We need to talk." He walked into the office, the same office I used to run my business from, and sat across from me. Not as a husband, not as an executive, as someone completely unarmed. "They're investigating her," he said. "The SEC, the DOJ. It's real, everything's real. She's falling apart." I didn't respond. I just stared. I need your help, he said finally. I don't know what's in the files I signed. I don't know what I'm exposed to. He was trembling. I need your analysis. Your mind, Avery, please. And there it was. After all the dismissals, all the insults, all the dinners I wasn't invited to, all the rooms he'd allowed me to be laughed out of, he was sitting in mine, begging for the one thing he'd once called a hobby. If you've ever had someone devalue your gifts only to come crawling back when the consequences hit, say so in the comments. This isn't revenge. This is truth, and it deserves to be heard. I looked him in the eye and said, "Tell me again what Vanessa thinks about quarterly filings." He looked away, because now he knew. I hadn't just come back. I'd been watching the whole time, and I was the one holding the receipts. And if you believe the truth deserves to be louder than silence, louder than laughter, louder than any name they try to call you, then tap that like button and don't go anywhere. Because we're not finished yet. He didn't expect the manila folder. I slid it across the desk with the same steadiness I used when handing over client reports that would shift million-dollar portfolios. No drama, no hesitation. "What's this?" Mark asked, though his voice hinted he already knew. "My exit strategy," I said. Inside were printouts of apartment listings, signed consultation notes from 2 separate divorce attorneys, and a finalized consulting agreement from Whitestone Partners, one of the largest hedge funds in the Midwest. The contract alone was worth more than his annual salary. He opened the folder slowly, like each page might cut him. "You're leaving?" I nodded. "I'm not doing this anymore. The silence, the erasure, the shrink-to-fit version of me you seemed perfectly happy with. I'm done wearing that skin." He swallowed. His hands were shaking. "Avery, I know I haven't been fair, but this is everything falling apart. I need you now. We're a team." "No, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "We were a team, a long time ago. Before you started quoting Vanessa instead of listening to me. Before you let them laugh at me and called it a misunderstanding." He looked down. "I thought you'd laugh about it later," he muttered. The rage came back in a flash, but I held it. "You knew about the card, didn't you?" I asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. I pressed further. "She showed you the card before the gala. You saw it, and you said nothing." He nodded slowly. "She said it was just a joke," he whispered. "She said you'd get it. That you were strong enough to laugh." My stomach turned. I felt sick not from the betrayal, but from the realization that this man had truly stopped seeing me as a person. I had become a prop in his corporate story, a silent partner, who was useful only as long as I didn't take up space. "Do you even realize," I said, "that the woman you allowed to define my worth in front of your colleagues is now the center of a federal securities fraud investigation?" He blinked. "Vanessa's being indicted because someone like me did the job no one else dared to do. Someone like me read the numbers, followed the trail, and documented every lie." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stood and grabbed my suitcase from behind the desk. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To my new apartment. I'm signing the lease this afternoon." He sat back, stunned. "This can't be it. Avery, we can fix this. I made mistakes, I admit that, but we can work through it." "Did you plan to start respecting my work after Vanessa's sentencing? After your career is ruined? Or only once you needed my mind to save yours?" I asked each word like a blade he couldn't dodge. He lowered his eyes. I thought you'd always be here." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You thought wrong. If you've ever had to walk away, not because you wanted to, but because staying meant disappearing, leave a comment that says, 'I chose me.' Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is finally stop proving your worth to people who benefit from forgetting it." On my way out, I left a note on the kitchen counter. "It wasn't the insult that broke us. It was your silence after. The woman you dismissed is the same one who just brought down your mentor's empire. Maybe next time you'll remember underestimating people has consequences." I walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in years, it felt like I could finally breathe. And if you believe in the quiet power of reclaiming your voice, hit that like button. Share your story. This journey isn't just mine. It's for anyone who ever refused to disappear. The apartment was nothing like the house Mark and I had once shared. There were no wedding photos on the wall. No echoes of conversations where I'd tiptoe around his insecurities. No scent of cedarwood cologne that clung to his side of the bed long after he'd stopped coming home early. Just light, big windows, clean hardwood floors, air that didn't feel heavy. Everything I brought with me fit into 6 boxes and 1 suitcase. That's how much of a 9-year marriage I needed to carry forward. The first thing I did was hang my diplomas. It felt symbolic. ritualistic, a reclaiming of self. My PhD in financial analysis from Northwestern, my certified fraud examiner certificate, the award I received from the Midwestern Investment Trust Association for uncovering fraud in an agriculture commodities scheme. All the proof that I had never been just someone who helps small investors with their little portfolios, as Vanessa once described. These weren't relics. They were reminders. I wasn't here because I failed to make a marriage work. I was here because I finally remembered who I was before I let it slip away for someone else's comfort. Tuesday morning, I got the call that solidified it. Patricia Morrison, managing director at Whitestone Capital. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and sharp enough to slice glass. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days," she said. "I followed your work for years, especially your recent analysis on Orion dynamics. We need someone like you." My breath caught. "You want to bring me on, full-time?" "No," she said, her tone suddenly amused. "We want to build an entire division around you." The offer was generous. $200,000 base, performance bonuses, full research autonomy, a team of analysts under my direction. A seat at the table this time, not as anyone's +1. By Friday, I had keys to my new office, a sleek badge with my name and business cards that read, Avery Lawson, Director of Equity Research, Whitestone Capital. The first assignment was familiar. Evaluate a biotech company positioned as a hot acquisition target. On the surface, everything looked fine, clean. Revenue, solid growth, promising drug pipelines. But to me, it smelled wrong. I spent 2 days combing through their SEC filings, licensing disclosures, and pharmaceutical trial data. And there it was. Revenue recognition tied to licensing deals that weren't finalized. R&D expenses shoved into subsidiary silos. A pattern of inflating pipeline value based on shaky clinical outcomes. Déjà vu, Vanessa. I slid the report across Patricia's desk. "This company is cooking their books," I said. She skimmed the charts and graphs. "How certain are you?" "Certain enough to stake my reputation on it." She smiled. "This is why we hired you." That report saved Whitestone nearly $40 million in what would have been a disastrous acquisition. And for the first time in years, when the partners applauded my analysis, it wasn't in surprise, it was in respect. They didn't see me as someone playing with numbers. They saw me as the woman who saw through the fog. If you've ever left behind something familiar, something you loved because you finally remembered your worth, share your moment in the comments. Because remembering who you are is the beginning of every comeback story that matters. And just like that, I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't Mark's wife. I wasn't the gold digger nobody. I was Avery Lawson. And I had just rewritten the ending they thought they'd chosen for me. Thursday morning began like any other, with coffee in hand, and a quiet hum from the city rising through the windows of my new apartment. But the notification that lit up my phone screen stopped everything. Former tech executive Vanessa Jameson indicted on federal securities fraud charges. It wasn't a rumor this time. It wasn't forum speculation or a vague internal memo. This was the real thing: indictment, federal charges, potential prison time. I clicked the article. The photo they used was almost cruel. Vanessa, once the perfectly groomed and polished face of corporate power, now stood outside a federal courthouse in flats and a department store blazer. Her hair unkempt, her posture slouched, nothing like the poised, high-heeled version of her I remembered dominating every room she walked into. The charges were damning: falsifying investor disclosures, manipulating revenue, misrepresenting stock options, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. The DOJ wasn't playing. They had a full list of evidence, and the phrase pattern of intentional deception appeared more than once. They quoted internal emails, Slack transcripts, whistleblower testimonies, everything I had gathered, everything I had triggered. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt something deeper, quieter. Satisfaction, not because she'd fallen, but because the truth had risen to the surface. Vanessa's entire career had been built on controlling perception, of creating a polished, flawless image while stepping on anyone who threatened to dull her shine. She manipulated data the same way she manipulated people, with precision and just enough plausible deniability to get away with it. Until she didn't. And when I read the comments beneath the article, something in me shifted again. Isn't this the exec who humiliated a woman at their gala? Remember the place card incident? Karma doesn't miss. I worked under her. She built a culture of cruelty masked as high performance. Glad someone finally said enough. That's when I realized this wasn't just justice for me. It was justice for every intern who was belittled in a meeting, for every analyst who was told to stay in their lane, for every spouse who sat at a table and smiled while being treated like a shadow, and for everyone who was ever told they weren't enough just because they didn't fit the mold. I closed the article and sat back in my chair, letting the moment land. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Mark. I didn't need to open it. I already knew. He'd be spiraling now, jobless, untethered from his mentor, tainted by association. It wasn't just the investigation. It was the industry's quiet verdict. If you sat at the table while fraud was being served, you don't get to act surprised when the bill comes. Still out of curiosity, I tapped to read it. Avery, I know I can't undo what I did or what I didn't do, but I want you to know you were always the smarter one. I just wasn't smart enough to see it until it was too late. I hope you're finding the peace you deserve. Mark. I stared at it for a while. Then I archived it. Because closure doesn't always come in conversations. Sometimes it comes in the silence that follows the truth being known. If you've ever waited for an apology that finally came but realized you no longer needed it, write "already healing" in the comments. Because real freedom isn't hearing "I'm sorry." It's knowing you no longer require it to move forward. That evening I returned to work. No champagne, no fanfare. Just a fresh report on a new client, a new puzzle to solve, a company to vet. The work I loved without needing someone else's permission to do it fully. Vanessa's empire had crumbled. Mark's career had unraveled. And I was just getting started. 6 months after I walked out of the house I once called home, everything was different. And yet somehow more me than it had ever been. At Whitestone Capital, I wasn't a mystery woman in someone's shadow. I was the one shaping the firm's strategy, leading a team that hung on my analyses like they were gospel. My name carried weight in rooms where people actually listened. And not just listened, respected. My research had influenced investment decisions totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd blocked 3 disastrous deals, flagged 2 companies under SEC watch, and had analysts from other firms reaching out weekly with job offers I never needed to consider. My email signature read, Avery Lawson, Director of Equity Research. And every time I hit send, it reminded me I had rebuilt everything they tried to erase. But it wasn't just about the job. The life I was building. It belonged to me. My apartment, small but sunlit, reflected who I was now. No dark wood accents Mark loved. No muted tones to keep things sophisticated. No art chosen to impress dinner guests. Instead, there were books stacked on windowsills, bold blue throw pillows I picked on a whim, and post-it notes scrawled with quotes that grounded me. Don't shrink to fit spaces you've outgrown. Quiet is a form of power, too. Every Friday evening, I'd pour a glass of red wine and sit on my balcony, watching the city breathe beneath me. The skyline didn't ask me to prove myself. It just lit up brilliant, unapologetic, and let me do the same. One evening, Patricia, my managing director, invited me to a partners meeting. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about direction. We want to expand the division, she said. You've built something bigger than we expected, Avery. Your work is reshaping how we assess corporate culture, not just balance sheets. I didn't flinch. I didn't say, I'm just doing my job. Because I wasn't just doing anything anymore. I was leading, building, thriving. The Gala was a distant memory now. But every so often someone would bring it up quietly with a hint of reverence. You were that woman, right? The one they humiliated. I'd smile. No, I'm the woman who didn't stay silent about it. And then came the moment I hadn't expected. A fresh Google alert pinged on my screen. Vanessa Jameson, sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Fraud, obstruction, securities manipulation. Her photo, bland and washed out, accompanied the article. She looked small. Nothing like the woman who once orchestrated my public humiliation. The comment section was vicious. Finally, took long enough. Guess she should have stuck to humiliating people, not investors. Remember the woman from the Gala, she deserves an award. I didn't reply, I didn't repost it. Because my victory wasn't in her downfall. It was in my resurrection. If you've ever watched someone fall, not because you pushed them, but because you refused to fall with them, leave a comment that says, "Still rising." Because that's what we do when they bet against us. We rise, quietly, steadily, and on our own terms. I stood up from my desk, stretched, and looked around my office. This life, this identity, I hadn't stolen it, I hadn't lucked into it. I earned it. Not just with skills or strategy, but by surviving what was meant to break me. By remembering that silence isn't the same as peace. And that being underestimated is often the greatest camouflage for power. The divorce papers arrived in a simple manila envelope. No special delivery, no dramatic signature confirmation. Just another document among the day's mail, except this one officially closed a chapter that had already ended in my heart months ago. I opened it with steady hands, flipping through the pages without blinking. no surprises. The assets had already been divided. There was nothing left to argue over, just a space at the bottom where my signature would turn the past into history. But tucked inside was a handwritten note. Avery, I know I can never undo the way I made you feel. I didn't see you clearly until the world saw you before I did. You were always the one with the real strength. I was just too weak to admit it. I hope you find everything I couldn't give you. Mark. I read it once, then again. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. 'Cause the truth was, I wasn't waiting for closure. Closure had come the night I walked out with my truth burning brighter than my silence. I signed the final page, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with peace. Peace that came from knowing I hadn't just survived. I had transformed. And I wasn't the only one, because after everything after the gala, the betrayal, the investigations I'd started hearing from women all over the country, emails, direct messages, even a handwritten letter slipped into Whitestone's mailroom from someone who only signed just another nobody. They told me about their own versions of humiliation. The job interviews where they were asked if they planned to have children, the colleagues who took credit for their work and then called them overly emotional when they spoke up, the husbands who praised their ambition in private but mocked it in public. And one message stood out. It was from a woman named Claire, a schoolteacher from Oregon. I watched your story unfold. I wasn't humiliated at a gala. I was humiliated at a parent-teacher conference when my husband told my principal, I just like to teach because it kept me busy while he handled the real work. I didn't say anything. But after hearing your story, I finally did. I applied for a curriculum director position at the district office, and I got it. That message made me cry. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. It was every person who was ever told they were too much, too intense, or too inconvenient. It was every gold digger, nobody who turned out to be the smartest person in the room. If you've ever felt erased but found your way back to the surface type, I remember who I am in the comments. Because remembering is the first step to reclaiming. And now as I sit in my office, overlooking the skyline business cards stacked neatly in a tray beside me, I think back to that moment in the ballroom. The laughter, the card, the silence. I remember every detail. But I'm not haunted by them. I'm rooted in them, because that was the moment I stopped shrinking to fit the version of me they were comfortable with. That was the moment I chose myself. And if you believe in choosing yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when it's not the version of love you once dreamed of, then hit subscribe. Stay with us. And let's keep writing these stories together, because we're not nobodies. We're the storm they never saw coming. And we are just getting started. Healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet, in the morning light as it spills across floors that no longer echo someone else's footsteps. In the silence between messages you no longer hope to receive. In the small, ordinary moments where you finally feel safe in your own skin again. For me, healing looked like spreadsheets. It looked like standing in front of a boardroom filled with sharp minds, and knowing mine belonged there. It looked like waking up in a space that reflected my values, my style, my voice, no compromises, no dilution. But most of all, healing looked like forgiveness. Not for them, for myself, for the years I stayed small to protect someone else's ego, for the nights I bit my tongue instead of speaking my truth, for every time I questioned my worth because someone else failed to recognize it. This journey, this transformation, wasn't about proving anything to the people who underestimated me. It was about remembering that I never needed their permission to take up space, and neither do you. If my story resonated, it's because pieces of it are yours too. Maybe you've been dismissed, maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, told to wait your turn, told to settle. Don't. Take your turn back. Raise your voice. Trust your instincts, and build the life that honors the power of your silence, your rage, your intelligence, and your resilience. If you believe you have the right to own your story, your future, and your voice, subscribe now. Comment below, share your fire, because this space is for us, and we're not finished yet.